and you can decide. You can just kind of like do it when you know that you're coming up on either a promotion or a time in service, pay raise, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 02, 03, E4, E5, E6, and just look. And if you're going to get bumped up into a higher tax bracket, that is a year that you want to make some traditional TSP contributions instead of the Roth. And of course, when you're deployed, you would always want to come back to the Roth because Roth are after-tax contributions, but while you're deployed, you're not paying income tax, which makes the Roth contributions 100% tax-free because you're not paying tax on that money now, and you're not going to pay tax when you get it out. Welcome to Service and Wealth, the podcast dedicated to helping military personnel master their finances and achieve financial freedom. Our mission is to guide you through the ins and outs of planning, saving, and investing, and most importantly, how to balance savings so you can enjoy life now and retire with confidence. Let's go. All right. Hey, we're back. This is our second episode in our series on the blended retirement system. And again, we're not talking about just what it is and how the system was created or, structured. You get plenty of informational pamphlets on that or briefs or PowerPoints. Everybody loves PowerPoints in the military, of course. What we're really talking about is what we talk about every week, which is tips and strategies. We talk about lessons learned. That's obviously something everyone in the military is familiar with. We really are always looking back after every training evolution, every combat patrol, every operation, every sortie, every flight, and we're talking about the things that we did badly and that we want to fix, the things that we could have done better, and we want to focus on improving. And at least in the Marine Corps, and I think across all the services, but the parlance are sustains and improves. And now that I'm out of uniform and standing here in a flannel shirt, in September, because it's like 45 degrees, I guess we just talk about the W's and the L's that we've had. And today we're going to continue this. We're going to move on to sort of the in-uniform management of the blended retirement system. And a quick analogy, and I think I've probably shared this before on the podcast, but the reason why we're talking about it today, and we're going to really focus on actionable things you can do, is a thing that happened or that existed even pre-BRS, and that was the savings deposit plan, SDP, which was for when you're deployed, you could just have some of your base pay set aside in the SDP, and then when you got back, you get like a 10% return on it, which is just as good as the stock market, but it's guaranteed. So it's kind of like one of those no-brainer things, but when we were deploying, we didn't learn about it until we were after the first deployment in our redeployment briefs. We got back, went out on our 96 4-day weekend, and came back and sat in a hot, dingy, dusty classroom, which was really just a warehouse in the middle of the desert. And we got all these briefs, and someone's like, "Oh, and then here's another financial tip for you: the SDP when you're deployed." And everybody's looking at the Marine to the left and the right of them, like, "What the heck? Like, we just got back. You didn't tell us this before." And so, as a result, you're a little bit ticked off, but you lost out on probably hundreds, if not thousands of dollars you could have made while you're deployed. And of course, while you're deployed in a combat zone, money you make is not taxable. One of those nice exemptions that you get in the military for putting yourself in harm's way is as long as you're deployed or you're stationed in an area or a country, area can be part of the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf, it's all in the combat zone tax exclusion list, CZTE, and we'll talk about that today. But there are these great opportunities, and if you don't know about them, you don't take advantage. And the BRS is really, It's so much different from the legacy high 3 retirement program because you really have to know about it, and you have to know how to use it. You have to know how to manage the BRS, and you have to know about the planning and the tax considerations and the things to do while you're in uniform. You can't just chug ahead for 20 years, and then at the end you start getting a 50% of your base pay every month for the rest of your life, and it goes up with inflation. So it may be $5,000 this year for an 05 retiring, but in 25 years with the indexing, it'll be closer to $10,000 a month, right? So that was easy. BRS, it's more complicated. There are more ways that you get benefit from it, and that means you got to have a little bit more complex strategy. Now, I did already say the T word. I said taxes, and so now would be a good time for me to just remember for myself to give that standard disclosure that what we're talking about is for educational purposes. We're talking about strategies, tips, lessons learned, L's, W's, all that kind of stuff to help you raise your financial IQ and take control of your finances. And then, the real true advice is once you're equipped with this knowledge, don't just stop there, keep learning, but more importantly, take action. Go out and do your own research, make your own decisions. And, as we said last time, I think it's really important. You never hear people say this enough. They kind of tiptoe about it on YouTube channels or any sort of informational briefs where they're like, every investment has risk, or and there you could lose. I think what really we should say is just own up to the consequences of your choice, right? If you decide you're gonna invest in Toto and Doge and all these cryptocurrencies that are created only for investing and gambling and margin trading and shorting, and you lose all your money, don't yell at the sky or blame your aunt for telling you to do it in the first place, right? Just own up to your decisions. And I hope that I kind of set the example in that when I talk about on this show things that I've done and ways that those choices have not worked out. And today I'm going to share one that has created a particularly interesting challenge, for me and my family financially. And it's right at the heart of the BRS and the Thrift Savings Plan, the TSP. All right. So, with that said, I want to quickly also say that I hope today goes more smoothly. This is actually the first retake that I've done. This is our 15th episode, and I've kind of promised trying to be lo-fi. I've done a little bit of editing and clipping for times when I forget what I'm going to say or stumble over my words, but I don't cut it all out, right? Because it's generally kind of a hot take, and just trying to get the information out there and be lo-fi and approachable and real. I'm not some polished professional speaker. I believe I can become a lot better, but it takes practice, right? It's taking a lot of reps, and we're going to keep taking those reps. And today's a retake because, yesterday I was kind of fumbling over my numbers, and numbers are going to be a big part of this to really kind of hammer home the importance of these strategies. I can't just tell you to do a thing. I feel like I got to say, hey, look, I've run the numbers, or in my case, this is the cost savings I can have. And then we also had our dog decided right in the middle of it that she needed some attention. So she came over, and then we had 4 deliveries. So the doorbell's going off. I'm pausing, recording over stuff. So, we just decided let's do a retake, and, maybe it'll work out better. Maybe I'll do better today. I hope I should, right? But you never know. One day to the next. Maybe I was really good form yesterday and I was just overthinking it. So anyway, to summarize in part 1 on the BRS, the podcast we did last week, we highlighted the 4 major benefits that come out of BRS. And one is you still get this, what's called a defined benefit pension, right? Which is the 2% per year times years times the average of your 36 highest months of base pay. And which is basically a way of saying whatever you're making your last 2 years in uniform, you're going to get 40% of that base pay for life as every month as a pension. And of course, that's if we were to take an 05 who retires at 20 years right now, and for some reason they were in the BRS. I mean, I converted to BRS for the last 4 years in uniform, but I don't think many people actually did. I'm sure any 05 retiring this year is still under the legacy system, but they would be looking at a kind of a running average of about $10,800 per month base pay. And so that defined benefit for them is going to be, like call it just $4,300 a month before taxes. And that pension's taxable. It's considered ordinary income. So it falls under the regular tax brackets. And again, I realize we always jump over the warrant officers. But, you guys, if you're a warrant officer, listen to this. You're in between an officer pay and an enlisted pay. And so you can just treat our examples for enlisted and officer as like bracketing, right? Like it's the low and the high, and you're in between. So if I look at, let's say someone who finishes their career as an E8, then, that individual with the BRS, with their last 3 years, they're averaging about $6,000 a month. And so they're going to end up under BRS. Their defined benefit is going to be about $2,400 a month. So you've got this range of $2,400 to, maybe $4,300 that you can plan for as a monthly taxable income. And, what I can say is that the amount that is withheld by the DFAS retired pay section it's kind of based on like your pension, right? So they're going to look at how much you're getting, and they're going to throw it in, and they're going to look at your tax filing status. And then they're going to withhold based on the 2024 tax brackets. And so as a result, the withholding is actually quite low. But anyway, all that is to say is that you're going to get that locked-in income. And what makes it especially beneficial, and why the BRS should still be, and this defined benefit should still be a major retention tool in the military, and for you to consider, is that first of all, only 10 or 11% of American workers still have a defined benefit. But of those, like 90% of them still have to wait until their retirement age in their 60s. But in the military, you get that as soon as you leave the military at 20 years. So you're fully vested, which means you're fully like bought in. And you can retire, depending on when you join the military, you can retire 38, 39, 40, maybe 45. Maybe you started a little bit later. And again, we're just saying you go 20 years. But you start getting retirement income, $2,400 to $4,300 a month, starting in your 40s, right? Now, what's the value of that? And why do we say that this is still such a huge deal that you have to consider when you're making that decision of whether or not to continue in uniform or not? Well, if we look at that on an annual basis, we're talking about $30,000 to $45,000. And we're taking it sort of like ballpark, $30,000 to $45,000 a year in income. And if we convert that over to how much you would have to have saved in a retirement account or in an investment brokerage account in order to every year be able to take that amount of income and pay yourself, well, we're talking about anywhere from about $670,000 up to over $1 million, about $1.1 or $1.2 million. So essentially, that's the value proposition. That is the value you have of committing to a 20-year career in the military and retiring under BRS, is your pension is on that 20th year as you get your DD-214 and the next month you start getting the pension. It's like the Department of Defense just opened a bank account or an annuity really for you in the amount of $670,000 to potentially $1.1 or $1.2 million. Now, can you imagine trying to save up that money on your own? That's going to take a lot of work. That's you would have to save a couple $1,000s every month and have it invested to get to that same level. So the BRS, even though people are going to, kind of drag it through the dirt because it went down from 50% to 40%, and they're like, oh, they're taking away our pension. And is that true? Yes, a little bit. It's still a huge value, and it's something to always consider. Now, the second thing that we talked about was as a main source of value is the 5% matching. And the reason we talk about the 5% matching being such an important selling point and being worth so much value to you is if we just look at, we're not even going to talk about how much you're going to save into your thrift savings plan, but if you're doing at least 5%, right? So that you're always going to get the match for the whole 20 years that you're in uniform. If you're an enlisted and you do that based on current pay tables, so, right, like every year the DoD gives everybody a little bit of raise, which means the 5% is going to go up. So the actual numbers for any of you listening who are still in uniform will be higher. But for someone who just runs through 20 years on the current 2024 active duty base pay tables, over that 20 years, the value of that 5% match is going to be, for enlisted, $47,751. And assuming you've just got that invested in a C fund or a similar S&P 500 index fund, it's going to bring in about $95,000 in returns over those 20 years. And so the actual value after 20 of your 5% match under the BRS is another $142,000, give or take, right? Like these are just averages. We're just using historical averages from the S&P 500, and we can do that because we've got 120 plus years of that information, and on a 20-year basis, it's never let us down, right? So it's a fair projection. So that enlisted value is $142,000. You add that on to that sort of lump sum value of your defined benefit, and now you see that 20 years is actually giving you a little over $800,000 in value for retirement and early retirement, right? Because you're already getting that pension. For the officer, again, assuming that they're doing at least 5%, so they're always getting the match over 20 years on the current active duty pay table, their total matching that they'll receive from the DoD would be $88,734. Yeah, I know it's considerably more. And when you look at the investment returns that they'll get off of that, the total value of that 5% match over 20 years is about $205,000. So yes, it's almost 50% more than what the value is to enlisted. We're not here to make judgments. But I have to admit, like every time I look at the active duty pay tables and I see the disparity for an E8 at 19 years from an 05 at 19 years, I'm like, in my experience, like these two individuals provide equal value to the organization, right? But again, that's just like your opinion, man, right? So if we had that, then for an officer's decision to stay in and do a full 20-year career, the blended retirement system is going to give them a minimum value between the defined benefit sort of annuity value plus the matching contributions of about $1.4 million, right? So these are not small numbers. There's quite a big pot of wealth waiting for you at the end of 20 years if that is a part of your career decision, right? And a lot of people will leave, and this is, again, I'm not here to convince you to stay in, but a lot of people will look at their base pay only, and they'll say, oh man, I'm making $40,000, $60,000, $80,000. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go out to the civilian sector, and I'm going to make $75,000 or $100,000, $125,000, and that's all. That's your decision. But in order to save up enough over the course of 20 years to have $1 million annuity waiting for you in your 40s, you're going to have to save about $40,000 to $45,000. I'm sorry, no, that's not right. About $25,000 to $30,000 per year of that new income, right? And so essentially the BRS benefits kind of like make up for the lower pay that you get while in uniform. You're going to get that value back at the end if you stick around. Now, the third and the fourth benefits we talked about are the continuation pay and the lump sum option that you have when you do retire. And we're going to save the lump sum conversation for next week's podcast when we talk about what you do as you prepare to leave the service and go into retirement, and while you're retired, what you should do to continue to maintain and manage your thrift savings plan and your benefits. And then the continuation pay will hit up at the end of today's episode. So we're going to take this time to before we get into that, the big, middle third of this episode is going to talk more about the things to do while you're in uniform with the 5% matching. So this is where we have to get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of the thrift savings plan and the blended retirement system and some of the laws and regulations that stand behind these kind of things. Okay, and so as a quick reminder, the thrift savings plan is a retirement plan sponsored by your employer, the DoD or your service branch, however you want to think about it. We just call it the military, right? And it's because when back in like 1974 or 78? I can't remember which came first. It's like the IRA came first, or the 401k came first, or the 401k, or the whatever. But when Wall Street and corporate America went to the IRS and said, we're sick and tired of paying these benefits out, it's costing us an arm and a leg with these pensions, we want to help our employees have retirement programs. We're willing to match a little bit. It's going to save us millions. And also we want you to make sure we can get a tax write-off for all these matching contributions, right? And in pure dollar value, the employers, the corporations, Wall Street, they save way more in taxes than they do paying out to any of us as a matching contribution, because they not only get to deduct as a tax write-off the amount of money that they match for us, so if there's a 5% match from ABC Corporation, they put that into your 401k, and then they write it off, but then also all the administrative costs and the transaction costs and like all the other BS of like how much it costs for computers and internet to do that. They get all the deductions. And so they actually save quite a bit of money from the IRS. And so the IRS wrote into law the 401k. 401k actually just refers to the paragraph of the Internal Revenue Code that says what this is. And like 20 years went by, and people who work for the federal government were like, hey, this stinks. Why do all my friends in the private sector get 401ks and I don't have one? Because the way the IRS wrote it is you couldn't have a 401k. And so the Thrift Savings Plan was born. So the Thrift Savings Plan is just a 401k that's specific for us. All right, and so then in 2004, the Roth was born. All right, and so by going through this chronology, I'm trying to just help everyone kind of organize it in their head that these are all different things. Like I hear so many young people in uniform talking about like, how much should I save for my Roth? I'm like, your Roth what? Right? You can have a Roth 401k if you have you run your own business and your own business sponsors a solo 401k. You could have a Roth solo 401k. You have a Roth TSP. You can have a Roth IRA, right? Individual retirement account, which was created, and it's not important which one came first, but that's for people who had employers that didn't have 401ks for them, and they still wanted to have some incentives for people to save for retirement, right? Because the government doesn't want to have a bunch of 75 and 85-year-old people running around living below the poverty line, and they also don't want to pay for them to live above it. So it's better for them to create these things so that we save some money for retirement and pay for our own retirement, and then our employer or the Social Security Administration can sprinkle in a little bit on the top and make us feel a little bit better and pay a little bit more to the people who never made enough to save. But, for us, it's like we've got a wide range of choices. And within the TSP, we have the Roth, and we also have the traditional, right? So there's two different ones. And they come in two different flavors from the tax law. With the Roth, what we're going to do, we're just going to take, let's just assume you're, what's a good sort of average type situation? I guess we could say let's say you're an O2, right? So you're a first lieutenant, or you're a lieutenant JG with over 2 years. So you're making about, I guess, $60,000. Or we could also say, what would be a good equivalent here from the enlisted side? Maybe like an E6. So, that could be it's a staff sergeant or a tech sergeant or something like that with over 8 years. So like somebody who's or even about 10 years, and they're going to make about $50,000. If this person is single, they're going to get a $14,600 standard deduction, which means they're going to take their $50,000. They're going to subtract the $14,600 when they file their taxes. And then the IRS is going to say, okay, you actually only owe us tax on that remaining, we'll just call it $35,000, right? Well, if you're contributing to your Roth TSP, your money is coming out of that $35,000. So it's after taxes. You've already paid taxes on it. And if you that means you pay $5,000 in tax. Now you're squeezing it down a little bit more, right? And since you've already paid taxes on it, the IRS is willing to look the other way. And so you can have it invested for years and years and years, and it will grow and grow and grow. And then, if you're following the flight path that we talk about all the time, where you're saving a set amount each month instead of like worrying about all these crazy percentages that you hear people talking about on the internet, and you're getting the match, and you end up by age 42, you have $500,000 in retirement savings. By the time you're in your 60s and you're ready to retire, you're going to have $2.5 million. And if it's in a Roth, you can start taking out money from there. You can take out at least $200,000 a year for at least 20 years, and you'll be fine, so long as you don't put it all in cash or all in bonds and you keep it invested in the stock market. So you can have a very lucrative retirement income, and it'll be free from taxes. And so that's why everybody loves the Roth, and they talk about the Roth. And they kind of ignore the other one, which is the traditional. And the traditional says, okay, you're saving for your retirement, and we want to give you some tax benefits on that now. So if you're making $50,000 and you want to contribute $10,000 to your traditional TSP, we're going to take that off the top, and now we're going to say you actually only have to report making $40,000, and then we're going to take the standard deduction off of that. So now that brings you down to a taxable income of about $25,000. Compare that to the person who's saving in the Roth, where their taxable income is $35,000. And if you're single and you're making, that's what your taxable income is, that puts you in the 12% tax bracket, right? And so the amount of tax you save, or the difference in the taxes paid, right, is the 12% on the amount that you put in. So you're going to pay $1,200 in taxes if you're in the 12% tax bracket to save $10,000 for retirement. So like your $10,000 Roth contribution actually costs you $11,200. Whereas the traditional contribution, it's considered before tax. It's or deferred, tax deferred. So it doesn't cost you any tax now. And then the catch to that, and why, again, this is why the water cooler advice, or what you hear around the wardroom and the squadron around the barracks and stuff, is like, just save to your Roth, is because If you're contributing to a traditional, the IRS will tax it once you want to live off of it, once you want to get that money back. But they won't just tax you on that $10,000 that you saved. They're going to tax you on all of the gains. So if you have $10,000 and you let it ride for 20 years, and now it's worth $100,000, and if they're going to want to tax you on that amount, and that could be, again, it wouldn't be, but if it was in the 12% tax bracket, it would cost you $12,000 in taxes if you took it all at once. It's more likely that it would push you up into the 24 or 32% tax bracket, and so you would lose like a quarter to a third of your retirement savings that you have to pay in taxes, right? So why are we talking about that? Well, there's two reasons. The first is that you should switch back and forth between the Roth and the traditional. That's right. While you're in uniform and you're saving for retirement, you should be switching back and forth. If you are stateside and all of your income is taxable, depending on your status, right? Like, again, this single O2 with over 2 years who's making $60,000 a year, the standard deduction is going to bring them down right around to $45,000. All right? Well, they've only got to stick around for one more year and be over 3 years of service, and they're going to be making $68,000, and their standard deduction, still single, is going to pull them down to $54,000. And they have gone, in that year, they've gone from the 12% to the 22% tax bracket. Their income tax has gone up 10% just because they went from being an O2 with 2 years to an O2 with 3 years. However, if they make their TSP contributions in the traditional TSP, they can contribute about, again, using these numbers, right? They're making $68,000. Standard deduction pulls them down to $53,000, and the 22% tax bracket starts at $47,000. If they just contribute, say, $7,000 or even $6,000 and change to their traditional TSP, that will reduce their tax bracket back down to the 12% tax bracket. So on that $6,000, it would have been taxed at 22%. And so by making that contribution, they are going to save, about $1,300 or $1,400 in taxes just by in that year deciding to contribute to the traditional TSP instead of the Roth, right? So you've got to be smart about it. You've got to know what the tax brackets are. It's really easy. You just Google 2024 federal income tax bracket and 2024 active duty base pay. Get your calculator app out, multiply the base pay by 12, and then subtract your standard deduction for single or married. All right, and for single it's $14,600, and for married it's double that. It's $29,200. Easy to remember, right? And you can decide. You can just kind of like do it when you know that you're coming up on either a promotion or a time in service, pay raise, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, O2, O3, E4, E5, E6, and just look. And if you're going to get bumped up into a higher tax bracket, that is a year that you want to make some traditional TSP contributions instead of the Roth. And of course, when you're deployed, you would always want to come back to the Roth because Roth are after-tax contributions, but while you're deployed, you're not paying income tax, which makes the Roth contributions 100% tax-free because you're not paying tax on that money now, and you're not going to pay tax when you get it out. All right, so that's reason number one. Reason number two is a little bit of a bigger one, and it's also going to kind of nest with reason one. Reason number two is that under the BRS, the 5% service matching contribution always goes into the traditional TSP. So earlier we cited how much that is over a 20-year career. For enlisted, they're getting just under $50,000 in matching contributions, which will grow to just under $150,000 when you include investment returns over those 20 years. The officer is going to get just under $90,000, and that will grow to just over $200,000 when you include investment returns over 20 years. Now, if you have all of that money sitting in a traditional TSP when you're in your 40s, when you leave the service, you're going to be looking at this. You're going to finally realize the problem. It's not too late yet. It only becomes too late if you're like 60 or 70 and you finally realize it. And that's because if you're just enlisted and you let that, 140 some thousand sit for the next 18 years until you reach retirement age at 60 and can start living off your TSP, it's going to be worth $600,000 in your traditional account. And if you're an officer and you do the same thing, you're going to have over $800,000 sitting in your traditional. Now, all of that money that's in a traditional, this is like the cruel part of what the IRS does, is that they want to tax it, but it's not fair, right? And when I say it's not fair, I mean there's no justice. If you put in $10,000 one time to a traditional TSP, and it grew to $100,000 by the time you're ready to start withdrawing it, the IRS is not looking back and saying that, oh, you actually only had $10,000 of total income put into this that we didn't tax. They're going to look at it and see there's $100,000 that they can tax. So they're going to tax it as ordinary income. It's not even taxed as capital gains, right? If you put $10,000 into a Vanguard brokerage account and it grows to $100,000, you've got $10,000 of principal and $90,000 of capital gains. Now, in any given year, you can pay zero tax on up to $94,000 and I think 75, or is it $94,150? Doesn't matter. $94,000 ballpark of capital gains. So you could take that $100,000 back from your Vanguard brokerage tax-free. But if you want to take that $100,000, and if you took $100,000 back from a Roth TSP, it's tax-free. But $100,000 from the traditional TSP is going to be fully taxed. And we're talking, that's going to be, if you were to, again, take it all back, you're going to end up paying about $15,000 in taxes. All right? So you have to manage, while you're in uniform, you have to manage all of this money that is coming in through your 5% service matching contributions and the returns that it's making. If you wait until you're 60 or 70, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, I've talked to a couple financial advisors and a couple tax accountants specifically asking about this to, kind of get what the street advice is. And they showed me the numbers. And basically, like every year you wait, it's just going to get exponentially more expensive. And so any clients that they have coming to them and they say like, hey, I've got $500,000 in this traditional 401k, they're like, just take the gut punch and convert it all at once immediately. Pay $150,000 in taxes and then keep it invested. And in 4 or 5 or 6 years, your investment returns will hopefully have made back what you lost in taxes. But if you just keep letting it go, that tax burden is going to get worse and worse and worse. And if you let it go from age 60 to age 70, your $500,000 could grow to $1 million, and now your tax hit is grown from $150,000 to $370,000. So like, under no circumstance can you leave this money sitting in your traditional TSP for a long period of time. You have to act quickly, and the best time to do it is every year to make an adjustment. And what am I even talking about? How can you do anything with this? Well, there's this awesome thing. It's not a loophole. It's just, people might think of it as a loophole, but it's not. It's not a loophole until we tie all parts of the strategy for the military person together to show you that the true loophole is being in the military. But there's a thing called a backdoor Roth. And basically what it is some people, some rich people, they hired accountants and they're like, I make too much money to qualify for a Roth, but I want tax-free retirement income. What can I do? And they figured out, and the IRS agreed, that if you have money that you can save for retirement in a traditional account, once you put it in there, you can convert it to Roth accounts. There's nothing that stops you from converting from a plan to plan like that. You just have to pay tax on it. And so if you were an ordinary person, you weren't, in the military, you didn't have the TSP, you didn't have a job with a 401k, you just had IRAs, each year you could put, in 2024, you could put $7,000 in your traditional IRA, and then you could convert all $7,000 into your Roth IRA, and that's a backdoor Roth. But when you have a TSP, you can do what's called the mega backdoor Roth. And why is it called mega? Well, because unlike the contribution limit to an individual retirement account, which is $7,000 per person, so you can't do like $7,000 to Roth and $7,000 to traditional, only $7,000 total IRA, either or both. There's no limit on how much you can convert, right? And that's like why I just said when I talk to some of these accountants, they're like, yeah, doesn't matter if you got a 500,000 or $1 million, just convert it now, and you can do it all at once. And so with the traditional, the TSP, its contribution limit in 2024 is $23,000, right? And there's some other, nuances to that and whatever, but because there's no limit on a conversion, let's just say you were, you and your partner are married filing jointly, or you file as head of household, and you make a lot of, well, I guess it wouldn't apply head of household. We'll just stick with married filing jointly. And you guys make a lot of money. Like maybe your partner is a lawyer or a doctor, anesthesiologist, I don't know, a crypto trader, like it doesn't matter. And if you make a lot of money, you might want to max out all that you can in that traditional TSP contribution in order to keep yourself down in, the 22 or maybe down to the 12% tax bracket instead of going up and up. Because it gets pretty stiff. Like you don't want to lose a third of your money to the IRS. And then you can convert all of it into a Roth IRA, right? And now you have Roth retirement savings. First, you got the traditional contribution, so that deducted from your income and saved you some tax. And then you find a good time to convert it to the Roth. And why is that? Well, again, you don't want it to stay in the traditional too long. And this is sort of where the story of my mistake comes into play here for this episode is, even though I only was in the last 4 years of my career was I in the BRS, those matching contributions and investment returns ended up being about $55,000. And so when I got out and I was just looking at my annual report on my TSP shortly after retiring, and I saw, there's $55,000 in the traditional. I was like, oh wait, I don't want that in there. Why did I not think of this sooner, right? Because now I've got to figure out something to do with $55,000 to convert it into a Roth. And if I was just do it all right now, in this tax year or last tax year, that would have been in the 32% tax bracket. With that additional amount of money that we would have to report and pay tax on, and so, we would pay, I think, about $17,000 or $18,000 in additional federal income tax to convert it. On the flip side, if I had done a little bit each year, right? Because honestly, if we're looking at that $55,000, less than half of that is actual contributed dollars from the service matching. Like it's about $25,000 of contributions, and then it's about $30,000 of investment gains. Why? Because we had just a couple of really great years in the stock market and for the C fund, right, where we're getting like 25% returns. And so if I had each year, at the end of the year in December, I looked at where we were on our income and what we expected to pay taxes, and just converted like the $5,000 or $6,000 in matching that I got that year, we would have been in a lower tax bracket in either the 12 or 22% tax bracket. Well, I was trying to be in the 12% tax bracket, right? Which means each year, assuming for 4 consecutive years, I did this mega backdoor Roth conversion to a Roth IRA. If we were in the 12% tax bracket on $6,000, that's, I'm going to need help on the math. What is that? $720, and then over 4 years. So if I had proactively managed these matching contributions and converted them from the traditional into a Roth IRA over 4 years, we would have had to pay about $3,000 in taxes, $4,000 in taxes, as opposed to now we're sitting there looking at it, and because we've got to pay tax on all of the additional gains, potentially, 4 or 5 times as much, nearly $18,000 in taxes. So the lesson for you guys is, while you're in uniform, watch your matching, do the research of looking up your tax bracket, looking up your LES in December. You got to do it, or you should do it. Sorry, you should do it in the last 2 weeks of December every year. You don't want to do any sort of conversions too early in the year before you know what your actual taxable income is going to be, and can do a really good this is a time to go into the tax center, right? And just give somebody, your LES and say, figure out what my expected taxes are, right? And they'll do all the math. And then you can just look at it, make a simple decision. You look at your TSP statement, you're like, okay, I've got, I've got $2,500 in matching contributions this year. If I convert that to a Roth, it's going to put my taxable income, I'm still going to be in the 12% tax bracket. Now is a good time because I'm getting promoted next year and I'll be in a higher tax bracket, right? So there's an even higher level to that. It gets even better, right? And so we talked about this. We mentioned the CZTE earlier, the combat zone tax exclusion. If you're in that area, every month that you're there, even if it's just one day, the entire month's income does not get reported to the IRS as taxable income, right? It's just like getting extra BAH. That leaves you with a standard deduction to deduct from other things. If you're single, it's $14,600. If you're married, it's $29,200. So let's say you get a 12-month, individual augment to a combined joint task force headquarters where you're, running the supply warehouse, or you're doing aviation maintenance, or you're the finance and accounting officer, or you're on the planning staff, or you're a battle captain, any of these things where you're over there in, say, Bahrain, or you're aboard, carrier strike group in the Middle East. There's plenty of other locations. You're, even in Southeast Asia, countries where you wouldn't expect, we don't know about any wars going on there, but they're still dangerous and they fall under the CZTE. Well, if you're over there for a 12-month rotation, you could theoretically have, zero tax, which would mean that you could use your entire standard deduction. You don't want it to go to waste. So why not do a Roth backdoor conversion in that year? And in fact, a really, shrewd way to lower your total taxes would be to make contributions to your, if you know you're in a community that's going to deploy every 3 or 4 years, make traditional contributions in the years you're stateside. Then when you're deployed, do a mega backdoor Roth of all of your contributions, all the matching contributions, and any additional contributions you do while you're deployed, you're putting in your Roth TSP, right? Because you didn't pay any tax on that money, so it's 100% tax-free. And that's that you can just repeat that, and your goal should be to leave the service with $0 in your traditional TSP. Because once you're a civilian, there's no more CZTE tax exclusions, right? In our case, what we're doing is we're going to sit on that traditional TSP balance until we find a reasonable, our next, real estate investment that we want to make that will give us some tax deductions and depreciation that we can use. And then whatever we figure we can use from the deductions and depreciation, that's the amount of the traditional that will convert, right? And so then it just balances out. We don't get any of the, we're not getting ahead, but we're not getting behind. But that's a complex problem, right? It's so much easier to just, while you're in uniform, going through your career, do the conversions and when you're deployed. And at the very least, once you're out of the barracks or you're an officer and you're getting BAH, you know that equivalent salary in the civilian world would put you in a much higher tax bracket, right? Because you've got BAH of $25,000 to $60,000 tax free, right? So the key thing, there's one key thing to look out for before we move on, is that so anybody can open an IRA, right? So if you have the TSP, you've got a traditional and a Roth, and I hear this advice all the time, and it's risky. I hear other senior officers and other folks who are, I don't know who they think they are, but they work in like community services, or they work in like, the command financial specialists, and their only qualification is that they're like related to somebody in uniform. And they're like, yeah, we strongly encourage everybody to go out and open up their IRA so they can make additional retirement savings. Well, you've got to be careful, because if you have a traditional IRA with money contributed to it, so let's say, you just kind of like wandered out there, you got your signals crossed a little bit, you're doing your 5% into the Roth TSP, and then you open an IRA with E-Trade, and it's a traditional IRA, and you make contributions in there, and now you're listening to this podcast, and you're like, oh, sweet, I'm going to do a conversion. You go back and log into E-Trade, you're like, oh, I have a traditional, let's open a Roth. If you have contributions into that traditional, you're going to disqualify yourself from being able to do the mega backdoor conversion from the TSP into the IRA, okay? So action step is to go out, and as soon as you're ready to do it, create a Roth IRA with a brokerage, right? E-Trade, Schwab, Fidelity, Ameritrade, Vanguard, independent brokers. Like, it doesn't matter who, right? If they offer a Roth IRA product, you can open one there. And the other reason is, excuse me, the TSP, there are some 401ks that you can do this all internal, but the TSP does not allow you to do these conversions internally. You can't just tell the TSP to take money out of your traditional TSP and put it in your Roth TSP. And it's just the way they wrote the rules, right? It's not like you can't figure something out. It's not like you're missing a button or a function. It's got to go into a different qualified plan. And so you've got to open the Roth IRA to do it. If you have a major like side hustle business that is enough to sponsor a solo 401k, you can create a Roth solo 401k, and you can do a conversion, backdoor conversion into there. That's why they're called Roth Conversions, and they'll go into any qualified Roth plan. And then when you want to do it, it's very simple. You log into tsp.gov, and you go in the very top menu, drop it down, you scroll over to the right a little bit, and there's like rollovers and roll-ins, or rollouts and roll-ins, or whatever. You go down there, and you click, there's like 5 or 6 questions to answer, and you have to have your account number for your Roth IRA, and you put it all in there. And here's the last major warning when you're doing this is they're going to ask you if you want cash out or if you want all the money to go to this qualified plan. It always has to 100% go to the qualified plan. And the reason is that the IRS says if you take it out early, you not only pay the tax, but you pay a 10% penalty. And so, I was just kind of like working through some numbers with someone who is going on an overseas deployment for a year. And we were just saying, like, look, if you can sync this up where you're like deployed for the tax year, like if you get orders that you're going to go over there and you're going to be gone, it only has to be one day, right? So you leave in January and you come back next January, even if it's January 31st of 2025, your income for all of January and all 12 months next year will be tax-free. And that means you have, and this person's single, they're going to have $14,600 from that standard deduction up to that amount that they need to take advantage of. And they do have a bunch of money in traditional accounts. And so, basically it was like, you need to plan to roll over at least that much. Now, if they do that, and they do a direct rollover to a qualified Roth IRA, it'll just all seamlessly get wired over there from TSP to E-Trade. They'll put it in your account, and then you just log in and tell them where to invest it, and it'll be no harm, no foul, right? But if you were to accidentally say, like, send it to me in cash, and then you go back and deposit it into the E-Trade account, the IRS is going to see that, and they're going to say, oh, so you don't have any taxable income. But because that money came to you first before it went back into your account, you owe us a 10% penalty. So you're going to have to pay the IRS $1,460 in that case. So those are the things to look out for. You got to do this every time you're in uniform, or while you're in uniform every year. And at best, you plan ahead so that you're kind of like loading up your traditional TSP balance for 2 to 3 years, and then you deploy, you do a conversion, bring it back down to zero, and just keep doing that all the way to the end of your 20, and you end up with zero left in the traditional TSP when you get out. Don't fear if you have some left in there, right? Because especially if you're going to take a few months off and not have income other than your pension, or maybe you're just going to take a year off or a couple years off, well, your income's going to go dramatically down from whatever you're making at the end of 20 years. And so you'll have a little bit of wiggle room. The problem only becomes if you leave the service, you've got $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 sitting in there, and you still are a high earner. You're still out there making six figures as a GS or something like that. Then it's a real problem. Okay. So now real quick, I realize that this episode's already pretty deep into the hour, but we did say the other thing we're going to talk about is managing continuation pay. So what is continuation pay? You've probably seen the flyers or the slides. Obviously, I don't think anybody's really going around posting flyers anymore. But if you go to like transition readiness or transition assistance office and classes, you're going to get the handouts and you're going to see the PowerPoint. So you're going to get it all. But continuation pay, in particular, that comes at 12 years. So you're not going to see it when if you're getting out before 16 or like before 12, they're not even going to talk to you about it. But anyway, not that important. But what they're going to do is they're going to pay you at 12 years, and the law says like between 8 and 12 years, but like only the Army does that. Everybody else does it at 12 years. And then they're going to pay you a bonus that is in exchange for 4 years of obligated service. The bonus by law can be anywhere from 0.5 half a month's pay up to 13 months pay. So by law, like a 12-year 04 who's making $100,000 a year, or how much is that per month? I guess they're making $91.16 a month. Like by law, they could be offered 13x of that. They could be offered $120,000 as a continuation pay bonus. But the trick with continuation pay is it is taxable income. And so it's kind of like this cruel irony that you're going to say, all right, I'm going to give you 4 more years and you're going to pay me my continuation pay, but I've got to pay tax on it. And so in 2024, the average for the active component was 2.5x, right? And so if we look across, for the average person enlisted or officer at 12 years, we're saying an E6 or maybe E7, somewhere around $4,600 to $5,000 a month. They're gonna get about a $10,000 or $12,000 bonus, and an 04 would be about $20,000 to $25,000, somewhere in there. And then the Marine Corps, crazy enough, the Marine Corps is like the high end this year. They're doing a 5x for their active component. And so that means that, an enlisted could be looking at like a $25,000 bonus at 12 years in the Marine Corps. And an officer, a major in the Marine Corps, could be looking at a $45,000 bonus, right, for their continuation pay. So if we just look at the high end, the $25,000 to $45,000, you're most likely no matter how, if you're married but your partner doesn't work, you're probably in the 12% tax bracket. But that could push you into the 22% tax bracket. And that could mean, and if your partner's married and you're an officer, it could push you up even higher, right? It could push you in like the 24% tax bracket. So at any rate, you're going to get this continuation pay and you're going to think it's going to be $25,000 or $45,000. But DFAS is going to withhold the appropriate amount of tax and give it to the IRS. That's going to be anywhere from $5,000 to $9,000 in these cases. Well, that's not really fair, right? Again, the IRS, they love to take, they don't really like to give. And so you got to ask yourself, okay, I'm signing up for 4 more years and I'm giving, a quarter of my bonus for doing that to the IRS. Why don't they come back and stand fire watch for me, stand officer of the day for me a few times and do some of the work if they're getting my money? But they're not going to do that. So you have to take things into your own hand. And again, syncing up a plan for your 12th year in service is critical so that you can get that money back. Because so long as you come up with a way to deduct from your income an amount that's equal to your continuation pay bonus, all the amount that the IRS withheld when they paid it to you, they're going to give you back when you file your taxes next year. Clearly, the easiest and best way is to ask for a deployment during your 12th year. Right? Even maybe you can PCS for 2 or 3 years to an overseas duty station that's in a CZTE. And now all the money that you're getting, it's tax-free, right? So, if I had been in the BRS when I was in my 12th year and had to make that decision, based on my overseas control date, I would have been eligible to take a 12-month individual augment. And, at the time I can remember clearly, we were constantly looking for people to go over and, man positions in the staffs over in the Middle East to deal with pirates and all the other stuff going on. And, if I was in that position again, I would definitely be lobbying to get that so that I could get my $45,000 continuation pay bonus tax-free, right? Now, if you can't do that, you're going to want to try to offset it in some other way. One of the easiest ways is to just look for additional deductions that are outside the standard deduction, right? So you've got the standard deduction, again, which is $14,600 for single tax filers and $29,200 for married tax filers. But if you go out and you buy some real estate and you could even, buy a house and house hack and rent out a room, a basement, and detached garage, fix it up and rent it out as a short-term rental. There's a short-term rental loophole, and that says that if the property that you're renting out, the average tenant stays fewer than 14 days. So it doesn't work for long-term rentals or month-to-month rentals, but if the average renter rental is less than 14 days, then so long as you're doing that 100 hours a year, you can qualify for writing off that. It's it's basically impossible to qualify for a real estate professional status with long-term rentals or almost anything else, but the short-term loophole is an option, right? And I've had more than a few colleagues in uniform who did that. They had a house and they rented out the basement as an STR, and that allowed them to take advantage of a lot more deductions and depreciation that are on top of the standard deduction, right? And another one is a home office. So if you've got a side hustle, you can deduct up to 1/6 of your property taxes, mortgage interest, utilities, phone bills, internet costs, etc., for that for that home office use, and that can be on top of your standard deduction. And the reason why these is because they're business filings, so they're additional schedules, and they show up as losses on your tax return, and they reduce your income before you calculate what you owe in taxes. Some other ones that are on the side are you can up to each year you can take up to $3,000 in capital losses and deduct that against your income. So that could solve part of your problem. You would just log into your brokerage account and say, oh man, I bought Tesla, back in 2022, right before it like nosedived. I'm going to sell some of it, and I'm going to take a capital loss of $3,000, and then I can subtract that from my income. Or maybe if you have student loans, you can pay some extra towards that and deduct some of the extra loan interest. One of the things you can't do is you can't use a health savings account, which would open up the door to at least, I think, $4,500 in tax deductions. But because you have TRICARE, you can't do it. And one of the other really good ones is if you purchase a large vehicle for business purposes, a vehicle that's over 6,000 pounds in weight, you can deduct. I think this year it's between 0 and 80% of it. You can choose to deduct all at once. So, for example, here's a cool aside. And this will be we're going to end on this right before I get distracted with a whole nother topic. But Turo just announced that you can start renting out box trucks on the app. And my thought was like, oh my gosh, how many like box trucks could I afford to buy and run as a Turo in a military town? With all of the folks coming in and out who want to they're going to move out of the barracks out in town, or they're, moving from one apartment to the next, or they start an apartment and then they bought their first house, and, they don't want to bug like 20 of their friends to come over and run convoys with pickup trucks, and they don't want to pay like $10,000 for movers to come do it. But if they could rent, a box truck for a few $100, they could move themselves, and people are always moving to military towns. And then you could just, maybe you buy 2 of those, and it doesn't even matter if you finance them, right? You can finance them, lease them, and you can deduct the whole value of it. So you could right there, come up with enough to offset your continuation pay bonus. But, so again, this episode was all about like while you're in uniform, strategies that you need to think about and take action on in order to avoid paying tens of thousands of dollars in taxes on the bonuses and incentives you get from the blended retirement system, right? If you're going to get between a 5% match, the investment returns on it, and continuation pay, if you're going to get anywhere from $150,000 to $250,000 in value through the BRS from the military, you don't want to be paying 1/5, 1/3 of that in taxes back to the IRS. You want to keep all of it, and that requires strategy and planning and taking advantage of all these great things that we have in the military, where we're in lower tax brackets because we have tax-free BAH. We can deploy to places that we can exclude all of our income from taxes. And as long as you can plan ahead at least 1, 2 to 3 years to do these things like a mega backdoor Roth conversion, or to get a deployment during your 12th year when you get your continuation pay, or to have other deduction strategies in place, tax deduction strategies in place, you can keep more of your money, right? And get that maximum value from the BRS. All right. You can tell, obviously, like this is always at the forefront of my mind. As I said during the episode, I didn't have a plan or strategy for what to do with my traditional TSP and the matching funds that I got and the investment returns. And now we've got a bit of a challenge on our hands. But that makes this a great topic to share with you. So as you continue to go through and you are in uniform and you do have these opportunities, you can take advantage. And you can take advantage and start taking action right now. If you don't have a Roth IRA, go out and open one up. And you're already halfway there, right? Once you have that opened up, the next step, you can do your very first conversion. Now, I highly recommend that you check out our blog post from this week, because in it we just focus on that conversion, and we have screenshots in there so you can see, like in the TSP, like where to go and like things to click. And also, why not just check out YouTube? Like as soon as I can figure out how to make a video and like put it on YouTube, I'll do a video of it. But there's others out there already. I just would want you to watch mine, right? I'm not trying to endorse somebody. But there's plenty of examples out there, so you can watch someone do a backdoor Roth conversion. And so if you're in the position right now where you've got traditional TSP funds and you want to convert them to Roth, make sure you study it so you don't make the mistakes that we talked about in today's episode that could cost you taxes or penalties. All right, next week we're going to come back and we'll finish up the BRS when we talk about what to do with it, how to manage it as you're approaching your retirement date or your separation date, right? When we talk about that, it doesn't have to be only for retirees. Anybody, as you approach your end of active service, your separation date, what you should be doing with your TSP, and then after you get out, what you should do with it. And the third thing that we'll talk about is, should you take the lump sum payment if you are retiring and you have that option? Here's a preview. Some people will say no, but I'm saying yes. All right, so until next week, thanks for tuning in. As always, head over to our website, www.militarywealthcoach.com. Opt in for our weekly newsletter so you can stay up to date with all the latest, and also connect with us on all our socials. And so until next week, stay financially fit and mission ready.